Well, good morning, church. Welcome back to our midweek Lenten devotion. We've been focusing on Chris Wright's To the Cross during this Lenten season. And it's been a great book, great study for us to go through, focusing on the last week of Christ. And we're gonna jump into that in just a minute. But quickly, I just wanted to say, first, Happy St. Patrick's Day. It's a great holiday, one that I have always enjoyed. And just a quick disclaimer, I get a little self-conscious on these Wednesday videos about whether or not I have worn this shirt too recently in a video. So every Wednesday I'm thinking, what shirt did I wear last week? What did I wear the week before that? And so I want to just point out that this is the same shirt that I wore last Wednesday, but because it was St. Patrick's Day and it was a green shirt, I felt like I did need to wear it again. So that's me, that's my own self-consciousness about these videos that comes up from time to time. But I share that with you as a point of humor. Today we are reading from the Gospel of Mark. We're going to read from Mark 15, and this is the part of Mark's Gospel where he tells us about the death of Christ. So Mark 15, verses 33 to 39. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, Behold, he is calling Elijah. And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink and said, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, Truly, this man was the Son of God. It's a pretty remarkable passage that we've read here today from Mark. And just a couple things I want to share as we get into this. This is, of course, 6 verses that tell us of the death of Christ. Interesting thing about Mark is 16 chapters long, and 1/5 of the entire gospel focuses on this last week of Jesus' life. It focuses on the last week, what we now celebrate as Holy Week, from when he entered into Jerusalem on what we celebrate as Palm Sunday to Easter. And Mark really doesn't have a whole lot to say about Easter. Things end pretty soon after his death. Chapter 16 is very, very brief in that. But 1/5 of Mark's gospel focuses on this last week, which just tells us kind of how important it is as we've been focusing on it during this Lenten season and in the book study we're doing now. That, of course, means that he only leaves 4/5, which is still substantial, but that is what focuses on 3.5 years. And so 1/5 focuses on 1 week, and 4/5, the remaining part of his gospel, focuses on 3 years and some change there. Anyway, in this chapter, Chris Wright talks about darkness into light, and that's the title of this chapter as well, From Darkness to Light. And we see a literal darkness that occurs at the beginning of this passage. And so he gives us kind of 4 things that focus on that darkness, and then the second half of this chapter focuses on moving into the light, and 4 things there. So we're going to kind of quickly talk through those. There's a lot that could be said about this, but I just want to kind of quickly talk through this. Now, starting out right off the bat, last week I very briefly mentioned this book here, Martin Hengel's Crucifixion. We don't get a lot of details of the crucifixion from the Gospels. And again, we don't see much of that in today's passage either. But everyone knew that crucifixion was the most painful and shameful way in which to carry out capital punishment at the time. It was the Romans had taken what had been a practice and made it even worse. So Jesus would have been hanging naked on that cross, which as a Jewish man would have been the ultimate act of shame. And so again, in the midst of that pain and in the midst of that shame, we see this darkness come about at noon, the 6th hour to the 9th hour, so from noon to 3 p.m. And again, Wright kind of speculates here that God causes this darkness to hide that shame that his son is going through. He was suffering on our behalf. He was being mocked. And so he in order to help kind of hide that shame in the midst of our sin, he causes this eclipse or this darkness, whatever it is. Again, this is Wright just kind of talking about this, but as we continue to talk about darkness and what that means in the Jewish culture, that would have been a way to kind of save face to some extent in the midst of what would have been a very shameful moment. The second thing he talks about is that perhaps the sun stopped shining because the one who had created it was dying. We know Jesus was there at the creation, that he was with God the Father at creation. When we read the beginning of the Gospel of John, it talks about how he is the light to the world, and as he is being extinguished, as his life is being extinguished, then perhaps that light provided by the sun, what he created, was also temporarily extinguished. Again, some of this is kind of speculation on Wright's part, but it helps us to think through what all is going on, to have a visual of what's taking place, and to think through some of the cultural aspects. Because if you're standing there and you've just watched this man be crucified, and all of a sudden the sky goes dark, that's going to have an impact on you. You're going to remember that. It's not every day that something like that happens. The third point that that Wright brings up is that there is a darkness that surrounds judgment. Old Testament scriptures reflect on that. We see that throughout the Old Testament, that whenever we see judgment, there's a sense of darkness in it as well. And he also brings in something interesting here in regards to numbers, and I think that these numbers are significant. So he says that, of course, there's 12 disciples and 12 tribes of Israel. We all have probably made that connection before. He talks about the 40 days in the wilderness that Jesus spends in the beginning of his ministry, and the 40 years that the Israelites spend wandering in the wilderness with Moses before they can enter the Promised Land. Again, that 40 there makes sense, and we've probably thought through that connection before as well. But one that I hadn't thought of that Wright points out is that there's 3 hours of darkness from noon to 3 p.m., the 6th hour to the 9th hour. And those 3 hours of darkness correlate with the 3 days of darkness in Exodus. In the 9th plague that takes place in Egypt was 3 days of darkness. So those 3 hours of darkness correlate with those 3 days of darkness prior to that final plague. That final plague was, of course, the Passover, the angel of death passing over and killing the firstborn sons of all those who didn't mark their doors with the blood of the Lamb. Well, again, we know Jesus is that Lamb. Jesus is that final Passover sacrifice made. And so is this darkness just before his death significant in that 10th or in that 9th plague leading into that 10th plague. Something else that's really interesting that Wright pulls out here is there's a passage from Amos that tells us that this is going to happen. So looking at Amos chapter 8, verses 9 and 10, it says, "And on that day, declares the Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your feast," which would have been the Passover, they were just celebrating, "I will turn your feast into mourning and all your songs into lamentation. I will make it like the mourning for an only son and the end of it like a bitter day." Well, if that's not talking about what's happening at the crucifixion, I don't know what is. The feast turning into mourning, the sun going down at noon, a mourning, a grieving, a loss of an only son. Again, I think that this is all pointing to what was happening, and it was foretold that this would happen. The fourth point of darkness that Wright brings up is that it represents a separation between God the Father and God the Son. The only thing that can separate a human being from God is sin. And Isaiah writes, "Your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sins have hidden you from his face, have hidden his face from you so that you will not hear." Again, sin is the only thing that can separate us from our Creator. And that can happen in our human lives. But Jesus knew no sin. Jesus was free of sin. But he took on our sin, and that caused him to feel that separation from God the Father. He did that on our behalf so that we don't have to in eternity. And right here goes to Psalm 22, and he reflects on some of the words that Jesus has said as well. My God, why have you forsaken me? There's a good bit more we could talk about with this. He goes into much more depth, and I hope that when we gather on the 24th, we can discuss some of this. But I want us to go ahead and look at now from the darkness where we've been going into the light, which is the second bit of this chapter that Chris Wright reflects on. So moving into the light, first part of that he says is, of course, at 3 p.m., after those 3 hours of darkness, the sun returns. The sky is bright again. Jesus has paid that price of death. He's done that on our behalf. And so now that process of redemption begins, and it begins with the sun shining. This ultimately, of course, climaxes in Easter. And in just a few days, Jesus is going to resurrect, and he's going to come back from the dead. And that, of course, is that the climax of all. That is the climax really in all of Scripture and in the greatest story ever told, that this would be what happens next. But that begins right there at 3 p.m. when the sun comes back out and that darkness ends. The second point he makes, I think, takes us back to Psalm 22. You know, it begins with that, my God, why have you forsaken me? But if we look at the whole Psalm 22, the whole of it, we see that it ends in God's great triumph. It says that all the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations will bow down before him. And so what began in darkness, Jesus dying on the cross, turns around into light with all the people bowing down before him. And of course, that's the process of salvation and sanctification that we are still going through today. The third point he makes in regards to light, from darkness into light, is that the curtain was torn. Now, y'all, this is significant. This is a big thing. The curtain was what had separated where God resided with the tabernacle and the temple from where the priests and then, the other courts of the Jewish men, the Jewish women, the Gentiles could be. Only the high priest could go behind that curtain, and he only did it once a year. And so that curtain was where God had resided with the tabernacle, pre-exile and everything else, but they still held on to that tradition even in Second Temple Jerusalem. And again, no one went back there. Y'all, even when the high priest did go back there once a year, they would tie a rope around his ankle with a bell, and that way they would know if he had fallen in the presence of God and needed to be pulled out from behind the curtain. So that curtain is torn, and that curtain is not just torn, but it's torn from top to bottom. Now, why is it torn? Well, that's God saying, I am now with you. There's no longer this separation between God and his creation. There's no longer this, you have to go through temple and sacrificial worship to reach me. It is now, I am your God, and I am with you all the time. The significance of that happening and the significance of that curtain being torn from top to bottom is that man could not have done that. The temple was not a small building. It was a very large building. It would have been, at that point, probably several stories or the equivalent in height. And so there's no way that anybody could reach up to the top and then tear it down. The only way man could have even tried to do that would have been to go from the bottom, make a cut, and then try to pull it apart from there, thus tearing it from bottom to top. But it was torn from top to bottom, meaning that the only way that could happen was for God to have reached down from heaven and to have done it himself, to open up that curtain and say that I am here with you. I am here to be with you, and there is no longer the separation that we see in the temple worship under Judaism. And so that's God establishing that true connection and relationship with his people. The fourth point that we see Wright making in regards to light is the comment of the centurion. Surely this man was the Son of God. And of course, that is coming from a Gentile. That is coming from a Roman guard, not someone who would have practiced Judaism, not someone who would have been, under the law or Old Testament or known those scriptures. This is someone who has just seen these events. He has seen this man crucified, possibly watched the whole trial take place as he was led out then to be crucified, stood there as he was, supervising what took place, seeing the sky turn dark, hearing these words, watching the interaction between Jesus and the criminals on either side. And in all of this, he says, surely this was the Son of God. those words right there have so much just meaning and power, especially coming from who they came from. Because the other significant part of this is that in Mark's gospel, we see reference to Jesus being the Son of God, but it is when God comes down at his baptism, "This is my Son." Or in the Transfiguration, "This is my Son, listen to him." The only time we see a human confess that Jesus is the Son of God in Mark's gospel is from this centurion. And so, folks, that is important. That is significant, that not only does a human finally recognize that, it's not just that you're the Messiah, it's not just that you were a great prophet or teacher, it is now a confession that he is the Son of God, and it came from someone that we would have least expected it to come from, a Roman guard. Again, this is an incredible chapter in Wright's book. There's so much in here to just chew on, to digest. There's just so much in these 6 simple verses of Mark's gospel. Again, I think Chris Wright does a wonderful job in kind of opening our eyes to that, and I hope that we can have further discussion on it next Wednesday when we gather, March 24th, next Wednesday. We'll gather either over at the rectory or over here at the church, depending on the weather, and again, hopefully just have some lively discussion in regards to the chapters that we've been reading over these last few weeks. I do want us to close in prayer, and I look forward to our continued study of this and continued gatherings as well. We're going to continue to get together. More details of that to follow, but we are going to start getting together for further discussion and studies and just fellowship as well. Well, let's close this morning in prayer, and I'm using the 4th Sunday in Lent still. Next week we'll use the 5th Sunday, which is Passion Sunday, and then of course we'll find ourselves in the midst of Holy Week. So, gracious Father, whose blessed Son, Jesus Christ, came down from heaven to be the true bread which gives life to the world, evermore give us this bread, that he may live in us and we in him, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Again, I look forward to spending time with you all soon, and I look forward to continued fellowship in this Lenten season as we prepare for Easter and then beyond into the Easter season as well. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Amen.